Good morning, welcome back. Another day here working on the 79 FLH. I do have some parts finally, so I can start the reassembly process. I do have the caliper I want to use and the proper caliper bracket. With the stock bracket, it has a built-in spacer, and I'll have to actually mock everything up and then measure for the spacer and then order one. Unfortunately, I don't have a mill or a lathe or any way to make a spacer, so I'll have to buy one. With this, I don't know if the rotor itself is good or not. I know it had .5 brake fluid spilled on it, and I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. As far as I know, you can't get that stuff off. So I do have a nice used rotor that I'll be replacing this one with. So what I've got is the bike up on the stand here, locked down in the front, and then the wheel will spin freely. That way I can unbolt each one of the bolts here that hold the rotor in place. My hope is to be able to get that loose enough to be able to pull off while still kind of on the bike and being supported by the jack. I do have the axle loosened, so the axle is already ready to be pulled out. I don't have anything in the way, thankfully. There's no exhaust or bag brackets or anything in the way to hold me up from pulling this bolt clear through. So with that being said, we're going to start by loosening the bolts on the rotor and try to get that apart. I don't want to remove the entire rear wheel. I'm hoping to be able to do this all on the bike. I know down the road I'll have to take this off because I know that this tire is shot. It's been sitting for a long time and unfortunately is heavily weathered. So I know that tire has to come off and be replaced. But I'm not ready for that right now. I don't have tires yet. I just want to kind of get the bike together and I want to take it down the road. I'm waiting for the weather to kind of clear up a little bit. It's been kind of rainy lately. I can take it out in the rain and the cold, but I'd rather not if I don't have to. And I want to run this bike through its gears. I want to see how it performs on the road and see what needs it might have. I mean, sure, I can do a compression test and all those things, and that'll tell me that the bike will run, but I kind of want to know what I'm working with. I'm at the stage right now where I want to get this bike as roadworthy as possible, if it's good enough to be roadworthy. And if I get to that point and it is roadworthy, I'll get it cleaned up and then I'll put it up for sale. I've got another project that I really want to start, and I need the funds to actually be able to put into that project. I know I was thinking about building this bike out and putting a sidecar on it, and I had all these ideas, but when I look at what I've got on the back burner, I know I need to start that project first. So this bike I don't need, so I'd like to either sell it whole if it's good enough to sell whole, or part it out if it's not good enough to sell whole. I'm not sure what is all good on this bike and what isn't. Like I said, I know some of the things have been upgraded or replaced. I know the motor has been gone through, supposedly. That's what I was told. You know how that goes. But I do see good parts on it. I do see that it has an S&S oil pump on it. I do see that it looks like the heads have been cleaned up. So at some point in time, someone has had those off. I'm not sure what's been done on the inside. I've heard it run, but that's it. Without having good brakes, I wasn't going to ride it. I had no brakes. So that's why I want to tackle this and get this part done. All right, with those loose, now I'll get this axle loosened up the rest of the way and I'll pull it. And that way I should be able to shimmy both the caliper bracket and the rotor out of place, and then shimmy the new rotor in place. So we'll go ahead and get this axle pulled. As you can see, the axle does have old grease on it, but it's super sticky. So I'll go ahead and I'll clean that up and then I'll get it re-greased. The bearings spin really nicely, so I don't believe the bearings are bad. But I don't feel like this has been maintained in a long time. My thought is I'll pull this cotter pin here, I'll swing this arm down, and I'll reuse that on the new bracket. I hope that that'll fit, and I think it will. Unfortunately, with the bracket that I have, I do not have that proper trailing arm. Unfortunately, I have to pull the front one as well. I'm hoping not to have to do that, but there's no good way to get it out of there without pulling it. As you can see, that bracket was nice and ovaled, so that one would need to be either shimmed or repaired or welded on, and unfortunately I don't have those parts. But I have a better caliper at this point. I'm glad to replace it with something a little upgraded. I'm going to slowly try to remove this brake rotor. I think that rotor's warped. Not that my floor is the most level floor in the world, it's pretty close, but that rotor has a little bit of tip to it, so I feel it's warped. Alright, I've got the new rotor in place. It looks really good on there. I'm going to go ahead and dig out my blue Loctite, and I'm going to reuse these studs. I know you're supposed to replace them, but unfortunately I don't have new ones, so I'm just going to reuse these for the time being. All right, now with the rotor installed, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this and clean it real quick, try to get it scrubbed up and get some of this grease and grime off there, and then I'll put new grease on it so that way it'll slide through really well and should make a big difference if I have to, or when I have to pull it again. All right, now that I've got the axle nice and cleaned up, I'm just going to apply a little bit of wheel bearing grease to it. I know this stuff ends up being kind of sticky too. It probably isn't the best idea. That's most likely what was on there before. Okay, I do have the axle put back in place. I did go ahead and snug the nut on the other side, so that way everything is where it should be. So with that being said, I've got my caliper placed onto the rotor and onto the bracket. What I'll do now is I'll actually put the hardware into the caliper so that way it's in place. I'll hook the bracket back up to it, and I'll take my measurement from the caliper face here to the swing arm to see what distance I need to make up there and see about getting the proper spacer. I do believe that the bracket itself is a little bit thinner than the stock bracket, and from looking at it, the stock bracket's actually bent a little bit. I'm not exactly sure what happened to the rear of this bike or how hot that rotor got, but it must have gotten pretty warm to warp like that. And being that these calipers were pretty well seized up, I can assume that the brakes had been neglected for a very long time. And of course, like I had showed you previously, the rear of the caliper itself, that guide pin for the asbestos plates, or the brake pads I should say, had worn through because the caliper had tipped down onto the rotor itself, and then of course that I'm sure created a ton of heat because it actually ate into the channel, the backbone of the caliper. So I'm sure this bike was ran that way for a long time, unfortunately. That's what happens when you neglect these old things. If you don't maintain your old motorcycles, or any motorcycle for that fact, you'll run into those problems eventually down the road. I am not going to blue Loctite these just yet. I'm just going to put them in place so they're there and they're holding this caliper where it should be. Once I get to the final assembly phase and I know exactly where I'm going to have all this stuff and that it's going to fit properly and I'm not going to be taking it apart a bunch of times, then I'll go ahead and Loctite that. My idea is that the rotor itself is not going to come off. I don't have a reason for it to come off, so that's why that one got Loctited in place. And one thing I had forgot, that stud right there for the lower bracket. So what we have to do is loosen up the caliper one more time just to get a little movement on there, and hopefully I don't have to undo everything I just did in order to get that in place. Not following my reverse order of operations very well. I believe with that removed, I'll have just enough room to get this in, and I do. So I'm very thankful for that. Sometimes with used parts you run into fitment issues, and that's what I'm having right here. Unfortunately, with this caliper that I have, I didn't have all the hardware. It didn't come with everything. The bracket was separate from the caliper itself. It came in a giant parts lot. I assume they go together because they do fit together, but it doesn't have the stabilizing arm. It doesn't have any of the hardware that's supposed to go to it. So what I'm running into is the bottom of this bracket here. The nut that I have that went to the old bracket actually was recessed behind. Now that it's not recessed and it is exposed, if I fit this properly, what's going to happen is it's going to run right into that rotor, and that's going to score the rotor and it's going to put a groove into it. I don't want that. You know, we're going to have the same issues we had before. So at this point, what I'm going to do is remove the caliper again, take that bolt back out because that's not going to work for me, and I'm going to have to find some sort of either recessed machine screw or something that's got a hole in it. I do have another one of these brake calipers for an 11.5-inch rotor. I could potentially move up to an 11.5-inch rotor on this, which would, you know, make this fit. I'm not sure if I want to go that route just yet. I don't think that I do. So what I'm thinking is I'll find some sort of a stud like this, or see if there's a kit or something online that I can purchase to be able to mount this properly. Otherwise, what I might have to do is either upgrade rotors or abandon an upgraded caliper altogether and go back to the stock caliper. I really don't want to do that. I do want this bike to have a good brake system. The front caliper has been rebuilt and that will go back on, but it's nice to have that little added extra insurance and a good rear caliper. So I'll continue to try to figure this out, try to find the right pieces. My thoughts are somewhere online somebody's got to have something that will fit this. But at least until I know, I can get this set up properly. I can take my measurements that I need to do and figure out what makes sense. This is dished in the back, so my thoughts are there's some sort of a Phillips head machine screw or something that actually fits that dish. The hope is that there is something like that out there, and if there is, then I'm gonna find a way to buy it. I've never run this type of caliper before, so I'm not 100% sure on what all the system would have had originally or not. Just based on what I'm seeing is what I'm thinking it needs or should have. Now that I've got the wheel aligned in the back of the bike, everything's locked down into place. Now I can take my measurement and see what type of spacer I'm going to have to find. So with that, I've got my digital caliper set here. I'll take a measurement. Okay, I've got my measurement that I need for the spacer, so I'll go ahead and I'll start doing some research to see if I can find the proper spacer for that. I may have something laying around, so I may grab a few spacers that I know I have and try to see if something's in that same realm or close. If it's close enough, I can face grind it off and at least make it right. That way I don't have to order something. But if I don't, I'll find the right part. And then of course I want to find that lower bracket hardware. Hopefully I can find what I need online. I don't have to buy an entire caliper to replace that. But that's as far as we're going to go today. This is the parts that I have right now available. So as far as I'm concerned, this rear brake is almost ready to be run. I do need to order a brake line, so I'll have to make a measurement here to see what length this is and then order the proper brake line for that. But once that's done, then the rear of the bike is finished. And then I've got a few more parts that I need to pick up for the front master cylinder. The rebuild kit that I ordered is not a complete kit, I guess. I haven't opened it up yet, so I haven't really seen. Once I get that, then I'll go ahead and I'll rebuild that front master cylinder, and then I will replace that front brake line as well, and then mount the new or rebuilt caliper in its place. I do think I need to get a bushing into the front fork leg, so that way there's no slop in the caliper. You know, trying to make this thing as tight as possible, so that way, you know, if it does run down the road, it's going to run down the road well and not give me any issues. So that's it for today. Thanks for following along. We'll catch you guys next time. Take care.